Hello, fellow truth seekers. Before we dive into tonight's story, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. What time is it where you're listening from? Are you settling in for the evening in London, perhaps enjoying your morning coffee in New York, or maybe watching the sunrise in Tokyo? No matter where you are on this spinning globe we call home, you found your way to ConspiraNap. If this is your first time with us, welcome to our corner of the internet where we explore the mysteries that keep us awake at night. The stories that official reports never quite explain. The questions that linger long after the news cycle moves on. If you enjoy these deep dives into the unknown, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. We have so many more secrets to uncover together. Tonight's investigation takes us to the frigid waters of the South China Sea and into one of aviation's greatest mysteries. A story that begins with a routine overnight flight and ends with questions that have haunted investigators for over a decade. This is the true story of what really happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, March 8th, 2014. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 pushes back from Gate C1 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport at exactly 12:41 a.m. local time. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, 53 years old with over 18,000 flight hours, sits alongside First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, just 27 years old and transitioning to the Boeing 777. Between them, they carried the responsibility for 237 passengers and crew members bound for what should have been a routine 6-hour flight to Beijing. For exactly 38 minutes, everything proceeded normally. The massive Boeing 777 climbed through the humid night air over Malaysia, following standard air traffic control procedures. Passengers settled in for the overnight journey. Flight attendants prepared for service. The aircraft's systems hummed quietly, maintaining perfect communication with ground control. Then, at 1:19 a.m., First Officer Hamid's voice crackled through the radio one final time. "Good night, Malaysian 370. It was the last transmission anyone would officially acknowledge receiving from the aircraft. Within 2 minutes, something unprecedented happened. The plane's transponder went silent. The secondary surveillance radar that had been tracking MH370 across Malaysian airspace suddenly showed nothing but empty sky. But here's what the public wasn't told in those first crucial hours. MH370 didn't just vanish from Malaysian radar. It disappeared from secondary surveillance systems across 3 countries simultaneously. The odds of spontaneous coordinated system failure across sovereign airspace boundaries are so astronomically low that they approach mathematical impossibility. For the next 4 hours, Malaysian air traffic control waited. They made calls, they checked systems, they assumed technical difficulties, weather interference, communication failures, anything except the truth that was already unfolding 35,000 feet above the South China Sea. The plane had not crashed. It had not exploded. It had simply ceased to exist on every screen, every monitor, every system designed to track commercial aircraft across one of the world's busiest flight corridors. What followed was the largest multinational search operation in aviation history. Ships and aircraft from 26 countries scoured millions of square miles of ocean. Satellites were repositioned. Deep-sea submersibles dove to crushing depths. The search consumed years and hundreds of millions of dollars. Yet for all this effort, MH370's fate remained a mystery, wrapped in contradictions and impossible evidence. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Inmarsat, a British satellite communications company, revealed they had been quietly collecting data from MH370 long after the plane's transponder went dark. Their satellites had continued exchanging handshake signals with the aircraft for 6 hours and 11 minutes after the last radar contact. 6 hours. The plane had not crashed in the South China Sea, as initial search efforts assumed. It had continued flying, following a path that led it far from any intended destination, deep into the southern Indian Ocean. But satellite data can only tell us so much. The real questions lay in the details that investigators either couldn't or wouldn't explain. How does a commercial airliner simply vanish from multiple radar systems simultaneously? Why were there no distress calls, no emergency signals, no indication of mechanical failure? Most troubling of all, why did the aircraft's flight path suggest deliberate navigation rather than a catastrophic emergency? The passenger manifest revealed its own mysteries. Among the 239 souls aboard MH370 were individuals whose presence raises questions that investigators have never adequately addressed. 20 employees of Freescale Semiconductor, a Texas-based company specializing in advanced radar and electronic warfare systems. 4 passengers traveling on stolen European passports. A Chinese national reportedly carrying sensitive military encryption research. These weren't random travelers on a routine flight. They were individuals whose work, connections, and knowledge could be worth killing for. Then, there were the sightings. Residents of remote islands in the Maldives reported seeing a large, low-flying aircraft matching MH370's description hours after the plane had supposedly crashed. Fishermen described lights in the sky, moving in patterns inconsistent with natural phenomena. Oil rig workers reported explosions on the horizon at times and locations that didn't match the official timeline. Each report was investigated, then dismissed. Each witness was interviewed, then discredited. The official narrative remained unchanged. MH370 had crashed in the southern Indian Ocean, victim of an unexplained catastrophe. But what if the official narrative was wrong? What if the disappearance of MH370 wasn't a tragedy, but an operation? What if those 239 people didn't die in a crash, but became casualties of something far more sinister? The evidence suggests a different story. A story of advanced technology, geopolitical intrigue, and a level of coordination that could only be achieved by actors with resources beyond the reach of terrorists or criminals. Consider the precision required to make a Boeing 777 disappear. The aircraft would need to avoid civilian radar coverage across multiple countries. It would need to fly undetected through some of the world's most monitored airspace. Most challenging of all, it would need to reach a destination where 239 people and a massive aircraft could be hidden indefinitely. Such an operation would require detailed knowledge of radar gaps, air traffic control procedures, and military surveillance systems. It would need advanced preparation, carefully positioned assets, and absolute secrecy. Most importantly, it would need a motive worth the enormous risks involved. The technology existed. Advanced radar jamming systems could create temporary blind spots in surveillance coverage. Electronic warfare capabilities could spoof or disable aircraft transponders. Remote override systems, originally designed to prevent hijackings, could potentially be used to control an aircraft against the crew's wishes. The question isn't whether MH370 could have been hijacked by sophisticated actors. The question is, who possessed both the capability and the motivation to orchestrate such an operation? Tonight, we'll explore the evidence that investigators either overlooked or chose to ignore. We'll examine the passengers whose presence on MH370 was anything but coincidental. We'll trace the flight path that suggests deliberate navigation to a destination that officially doesn't exist. Most importantly, we'll confront the possibility that Flight 370 didn't crash in the Indian Ocean, that those 239 people didn't die in a tragic accident, that what happened on March 8, 2014 was not an aviation mystery, but an act of war conducted in the shadows, beyond the reach of international law or public accountability. The truth about MH370 has been hidden for over a decade, but satellite data doesn't lie. Radar signatures can't be falsified, and the laws of physics don't bend to accommodate convenient narratives. What really happened to Malaysia Airlines Flight 370? The answer may be more terrifying than any crash, more devastating than any mechanical failure. Because if the evidence points where it seems to lead, then we live in a world where commercial aircraft can be made to disappear without a trace, where 239 innocent lives can be sacrificed for geopolitical objectives, and where the most sophisticated intelligence apparatus on Earth operates beyond any oversight or accountability. The ocean keeps its secrets well. But sometimes, if you know where to look and how to interpret what you find, even the deepest waters reveal their truth. Tonight, we dive beneath the surface of the official story and explore what really happened on that dark night over the South China Sea, when Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 vanished into a silence that continues to this day. The investigation begins now. The small town of Blackwater Falls should have been our first warning. Population 847, according to the faded sign, but we'd counted maybe 30 people during our 3-day stay. The rest of the houses stood empty, windows dark, lawns overgrown with weeds that seemed to grow in patterns too geometric to be natural. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, and until 6 months ago, I was a respected marine biologist. Now I'm something else entirely. A witness to something that shouldn't exist, carrying knowledge that makes sleep impossible and daylight feel like an elaborate illusion. It started with the satellite imagery. NASA had been tracking unusual ocean temperatures in the Pacific, roughly 400 miles southwest of the California coast. The thermal readings showed perfect circles of superheated water, each exactly 2.3 miles in diameter, arranged in a hexagonal pattern that stretched for nearly 50 miles. No known geological or biological process could create such precise formations. Dr. Marcus Webb, my research partner and closest friend, first noticed the patterns while analysing deep-sea current data. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight with excitement and something else, something that sounded like fear. "You need to see this." The water temperature inside these circles was 15 degrees higher than the surrounding ocean. More unsettling, the formations were growing. What had started as 6 circles had become 12, then 18. Each new circle appeared exactly where mathematical models predicted they would, as if following some vast blueprint hidden beneath the waves. Our research vessel, the Deep Current, reached the coordinates on a Tuesday morning in late October. The ocean stretched endlessly in all directions, a perfect blue that should have been calming, but instead felt ominous. As we approached the first thermal anomaly, our instruments began registering readings that made no sense. The water wasn't just warmer, it was electromagnetically active. Compass needles spun wildly, and our GPS system flickered between our actual coordinates and locations that placed us somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. Most disturbing of all, our sonar detected structures beneath the waves. Massive geometric forms that rose from the ocean floor like underwater cities. "These readings can't be right," Dr. Webb muttered, adjusting the sonar array for the 3rd time. "The structures are showing up as organic, but the geometry is too perfect. It's like looking at architecture made of living tissue." I was reviewing the thermal imaging when the first impossible thing happened. The water around our ship began to glow. Not the blue-green phosphorescence of disturbed plankton, but a deep amber light that pulsed in regular intervals. 3-second pulses, exactly synchronized with the electromagnetic readings we'd been detecting. The glow intensified as we moved deeper into the thermal zone. Soon, we could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Vast shadows that undulated with purpose. Too large and too organized to be any known marine life. Some of the shadows seemed to be ascending, rising from depths that our sonar suggested were impossible. Readings that placed the ocean floor at 30,000 feet below sea level, far deeper than any known trench. "Sarah," Webb's voice was barely a whisper. "We need to leave, now." But it was too late. The water around us had begun to rise, forming walls of liquid that defied gravity. We weren't looking at waves or currents, but at the ocean itself reshaping according to laws of physics that didn't exist in any textbook. The walls of water rose higher, creating a perfect circle around our vessel with us at the center. Through the translucent barriers, we could see the shapes beneath the surface more clearly. They weren't creatures in any biological sense. They were structures that moved like living things, vast geometric forms that pulse with internal light, and extended appendages that reach toward our ship with unmistakable intelligence. Our radio equipment came alive with signals we hadn't been receiving before. Not distress calls or maritime chatter, but something else entirely. Mathematical sequences broadcast on frequencies that shouldn't have been able to carry audio. Prime numbers, Fibonacci progressions, and other patterns that suggested deliberate communication. Then we heard the voices. They spoke English, but with intonations that suggested the language had been learned rather than naturally acquired. The words came from everywhere and nowhere, transmitted directly through the water into our ship's hull, vibrating through the metal and into our bones. "Surface dwellers," the voices said in unison. "Your species has progressed sufficiently. The deep cities are awakening. Prepare for integration." Dr. Webb was frantically trying to start our engines, but the ship's electrical systems had failed. Not damaged, failed in ways that suggested the very principles of electrical conductivity had been suspended within the water walls that surrounded us. "What do you want?" I called out, feeling foolish for speaking to the ocean itself. "Want is a surface concept," the voices replied. "We require cooperation for the next phase of terrestrial development. Your species has demonstrated adequate technological capability. The time for independent evolution has ended." Through our porthole, I could see one of the structures rising from the depths. It broke the surface like a whale, but it was the size of a city block. Its surface was covered in patterns that shifted and flowed like living circuitry, and along its edges were openings that revealed chambers filled with a soft, amber light. "Your oceans have served as our nursery for 65 million years," the voices continued. "We have watched your species develop, guided when necessary, waited for you to achieve the capability for symbiosis. That time has arrived." The implications hit me like a physical blow. These entities, whatever they were, had been here since the extinction of the dinosaurs. Every major leap in human technological development, every breakthrough that seemed to come from nowhere, might have been influenced by intelligences we never knew existed. "The thermal formations you detected are not anomalies," the voices explained. "They are emergence points. Cities that have remained dormant on the ocean floor are awakening. The integration of surface and deep civilizations will begin with willing participants." Dr. Webb grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with terror. "Sarah, look at the water." The walls of liquid surrounding us had become transparent like glass. But beyond them, I could see that we were no longer floating on the ocean surface. We were descending, carried by currents that flowed upward and downward simultaneously, defying every law of fluid dynamics I understood. The ambient light was changing as we descended, shifting from the blue-white of surface water to the amber glow we'd detected earlier. The pressure should have been crushing our vessel, but somehow the water around us maintained surface-level pressure, while the ocean beyond the protective barrier showed all the characteristics of the deep sea. We passed through layers of water that contained other vessels, ships from different eras, suspended in the liquid like insects in amber. I saw sailing vessels that might have been centuries old, military submarines that looked decades ahead of current technology, and stranger craft that didn't appear to be human in origin at all. "Your species is not the first to achieve technological sophistication on this planet," the voices explained, as if reading my thoughts. "Previous civilizations have made the transition successfully. You see their vessels here preserved as monuments to successful integration." As we descended further, the the scope of what lay beneath the ocean became clear. The geometric structures we detected on sonar were part of a vast network of cities that stretched across the ocean floor. But these weren't ruins or abandoned settlements. They pulsed with activity, connected by streams of light that flowed between buildings like neural pathways in a vast brain. And everywhere I could see the evidence of integration. Human figures moved through the amber-lit chambers, but they were changed. Their movements were too fluid, too coordinated. They worked alongside entities that defied description, beings that seemed to exist as pure geometric forms given substance, communicating through patterns of light that rippled across their surfaces. "This is what you're offering us?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "This is what you will become," the voices replied. Individual consciousness preserved but enhanced. Physical form adapted for existence in both terrestrial and oceanic environments. Your species will gain access to knowledge and capabilities that span geological ages. Dr. Webb was hyperventilating, pressing himself against the far wall of our cabin. "Sarah, they're not asking us to join them. They're telling us we're going to be changed whether we want it or not." As if responding to his words, the water walls around our ship began to shift. Tendrils of liquid, somehow remaining coherent despite being separated from the main body of water, extended toward our vessel. Where they touched the hull, the metal began to change. Not corroding or melting, but transforming into something that looked organic, while maintaining its structural integrity. "The process is not harmful," the voices assured us. "Your vessel is being adapted for deep ocean operations. You will serve as ambassadors, returning to the surface to prepare your species for what is coming." The tendrils found gaps in our hull and began flowing inside. I expected to drown, but the liquid didn't behave like water once it entered our cabin. It moved with purpose, surrounding us without restricting our breathing, somehow providing oxygen directly through contact with our skin. I felt the changes beginning immediately. My vision sharpened, allowing me to see clearly in the amber light that filled our cabin. My hearing expanded, letting me perceive the complex harmonic communications passing between the entities around us. Most unsettling of all, I began to understand things I'd never learned, the mathematical principles governing the flow of deep ocean currents, the electromagnetic frequencies that allowed communication across vast underwater distances, the biological processes that would allow human consciousness to interface directly with the vast network of intelligence that spanned the ocean floor. Dr. Webb was screaming, but his voice was changing, acquiring harmonic overtones that carried information as well as emotion. I realized I could understand not just his words but his thoughts, his terror at what was happening to us, mixed with an involuntary fascination at the knowledge flooding into his mind. The transformation continued for what felt like hours, but might have been minutes. Time itself seemed negotiable in this place between the surface world and the deep cities. When the process was complete, we were still human in appearance, but we were something more as well. We could breathe water as easily as air. Our bodies could withstand the crushing pressures of the deep ocean. Most importantly, we were connected to the vast network of consciousness that linked all the entities in the underwater cities. We retained our individual thoughts and personalities, but we also had access to a collective knowledge that spanned millions of years. "You will return to the surface," the voices explained, though now I understood they weren't really voices, but direct transmissions of thought and concept. "You will document what you have seen and prepare your species for the emergence. The deep cities will rise within 1 year, whether humanity is ready or not. Your role is to ensure that the transition occurs with cooperation rather than conflict." Our ship, now transformed into something that could function as easily underwater as on the surface, began to ascend. As we rose through the layers of preserved vessels and past the geometric cities, I understood the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't an invasion or a conquest, it was a graduation. Humanity had reached the level of technological and social development where we could be integrated into a much larger community of intelligence. The entities in the deep cities weren't aliens. They were the evolutionary descendants of previous terrestrial civilizations that had made this same transition millions of years ago. The thermal anomalies we'd detected were just the beginning. Cities were awakening across all the world's oceans, preparing to emerge and reveal themselves to a surface world that was about to discover it had never been alone on Earth. When we finally broke the surface, the water walls that had surrounded us dispersed, leaving us floating on normal ocean under a sky that looked exactly the same as when we'd first arrived. But everything was different now. I could feel the vast intelligence stirring beneath the waves, preparing for a revelation that would change human civilization forever. Dr. Webb and I returned to shore with our impossible story and our transformed bodies. The authorities dismissed our reports as hallucinations caused by nitrogen narcosis. The scientific community explained away our physical changes as unusual but not unprecedented adaptations to deep-sea diving. But I know what's coming. In 11 months, the ocean will begin to rise, not from climate change or tidal forces, but because the cities beneath are ascending. When they break the surface, humanity will face a choice: resist and face extinction, or accept integration into something larger than our species has ever imagined. The thermal anomalies are still growing. More ships are reporting strange encounters in the deep ocean, and sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I can hear the voices calling from beneath the waves, counting down to the day when the separation between surface and depth finally ends. The deep cities are awakening, and soon, the rest of humanity will understand what Dr. Webb and I learned in those amber-lit chambers beneath the waves. We were never meant to remain on the surface forever. The integration is coming, whether we're ready or not. But the real breakthrough came when we stopped looking at what was above the surface and started examining what lay beneath. Dr. Chen's team had been tracking anomalous electromagnetic readings from the ocean floor in the weeks following MH370's disappearance. At first, they dismissed these as interference from the massive search operation. Ships, submarines, aircraft, all of it created a cacophony of electronic noise that made precise readings nearly impossible. Yet as the search scaled back and the waters grew quiet, the readings didn't fade. They intensified. We were seeing patterns that shouldn't exist in nature, Dr. Chen explained during one of our secure communications. Geometric formations on the sea floor, perfectly symmetrical structures that extended for kilometers in directions that defied geological explanation. The official reports mentioned none of this. The public was told that searchers had found debris, that ocean currents had scattered the wreckage across thousands of miles of open water. But what they didn't mention were the sonar readings that showed vast metallic structures beneath the crash site. Structures that had been there long before any Boeing 777 fell from the sky. Dr. Webb's marine surveys revealed something even more disturbing. The ocean floor in the search area showed signs of recent excavation. Not natural erosion or tectonic activity, but precise cuts and modifications that suggested the use of advanced technology. Someone had been preparing the seabed, creating spaces, building infrastructure in the depths where no human eyes would ever see. The thermal signatures were impossible to ignore, Webb told me during our final conversation. We were detecting heat sources at depths where nothing should be generating energy, organized patterns of warmth that suggested active systems, operational technology, things that had been running for far longer than the few months since the plane disappeared. But it was the biological anomalies that truly shattered our understanding of what was happening in those waters. Marine life in the search area was behaving in ways that defied explanation. Deep-sea creatures that should never surface were appearing in massive numbers. Fish were swimming in geometric patterns, following invisible highways through the water. Most disturbing of all, Several species that had never been catalogued by science were emerging from the depths. These weren't evolutionary adaptations or previously undiscovered variants of known species. These were organisms that seemed purpose-built, engineered with characteristics that served specific functions. Some possessed bioluminescent organs that pulsed in synchronized patterns. Others had appendages that seemed designed for manipulating technology rather than natural feeding or reproduction. We started calling them the shepherds, Dr. Chen said, her voice barely above a whisper, because that's what they were doing. Herding other marine life, organizing the ecosystem according to some plan we couldn't comprehend. The shepherds appeared to be communicating not just with each other, but with something else. Something that responded from the deepest parts of the ocean floor. The electromagnetic patterns that Dr. Chen's equipment had been tracking weren't random signals or natural phenomena. They were conversations. As we pieced together the evidence, a terrifying picture began to emerge. The disappearance of MH370 hadn't been an isolated incident. It had been part of a larger operation, one that required both surface coordination and deep-sea infrastructure. The passengers hadn't simply vanished into thin air. They had been taken somewhere that existed beyond the reach of conventional search and rescue operations. The deep cities that Dr. Webb had discovered weren't ruins or archaeological sites. They were active, expanding, preparing for something that would require the integration of human knowledge and technology. The passengers of MH370, with their expertise in advanced electronics and their access to cutting-edge research, hadn't been random victims. They had been specifically selected for their potential contribution to whatever was being built in the abyss. But the most chilling realization came when we analyzed the passenger manifest one more time, cross-referencing it with the biological samples that Dr. Chen's team had recovered from the ocean floor. DNA traces found in the deepest parts of the search area didn't match any known human genetic markers. They showed signs of modification, enhancement, adaptation to environments that no terrestrial organism should be able to survive. The passengers were still alive, but they were no longer entirely human. We found evidence of systematic genetic modification, Dr. Chen revealed. Not crude experimentation, but sophisticated enhancement designed to allow human consciousness to interface with non-human technology. The passengers weren't killed or imprisoned. They were being prepared for integration. The implications were staggering. If the entities beneath the ocean could modify human biology with such precision, if they possessed technology capable of seamlessly blending organic and artificial systems, then their capabilities far exceeded anything in our current understanding of science. More disturbing was the realization that this process had been ongoing for far longer than just the few months since MH370's disappearance. Dr. Webb's archaeological surveys of the ocean floor revealed construction that dated back decades, possibly centuries. The deep cities hadn't been built in response to modern air travel or current geopolitical situations. They had been planned and constructed over vast periods of time, waiting for the right moment to begin their harvest of human knowledge and capability. "We're not dealing with invaders," Webb explained during our last meeting. "We're dealing with gardeners. They've been cultivating human civilization for generations, waiting for us to reach the point where we could contribute to their larger project." The passengers of MH370 represented that harvest moment. They possessed exactly the combination of knowledge, skills, and genetic potential that the deep cities required for their next phase of expansion. The plane's disappearance hadn't been random or opportunistic. It had been carefully orchestrated by intelligences that had been monitoring human technological development for far longer than we had imagined. But perhaps the most unsettling discovery was that MH370 wouldn't be the last. The electromagnetic communications that Dr. Chen's team intercepted included coordinates, schedules, and passenger manifests for future operations. Other flights, other carefully selected groups of individuals, who possessed knowledge or capabilities that the deep cities required. The entities beneath the ocean weren't just taking people, they were recruiting them, offering them roles in a transformation that would reshape both human civilization and the planet itself. Some passengers had gone willingly once they understood the scope of what was being offered. Others had required more extensive modification to accept their new circumstances. The choice isn't between resistance and surrender, Dr. Chen told me in her final transmission. It's between conscious participation and unconscious integration. Either way, the process continues. As our investigation reached its conclusion, we realized that exposure of the truth would serve no purpose other than to create panic among a population that was powerless to change what was already in motion. The deep cities were rising, the integration was accelerating, and humanity was about to discover that we had never been alone on this planet. The disappearance of Malaysia Flight 370 had been a beginning, not an ending. And those who had vanished into the depths were not victims, but pioneers in a transformation that would soon encompass all of human civilization. The cabin's fluorescent lights hummed with an electrical charge that seemed to vibrate through my bones. The walls, once pristine white, now pulsed with veins of bioluminescent patterns that reminded me of neural pathways, or perhaps something far more alien. I'd been documenting the changes for weeks now, watching as the facility transformed itself according to principles I couldn't begin to understand. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I was part of the original research team that discovered what we initially classified as MH370's final resting place. What we found instead was something that challenged every assumption we'd made about the nature of reality itself. The aircraft hadn't crashed. It had been absorbed, integrated into something vast and patient that had been waiting beneath the ocean floor for far longer than human civilization had existed. The first sign that our investigation had taken an unexpected turn came when we detected the geometric formations on the seabed. Perfect hexagonal structures stretching for kilometers in every direction, too precise to be natural, too ancient to be human. The oceanographic data suggested they'd been there for millennia, hidden beneath layers of sediment that should have taken tens of thousands of years to accumulate. When we descended in the deep-sea submersibles, expecting to find aircraft debris, we instead encountered structures that defied conventional understanding. The hexagonal chambers weren't empty ruins, but active installations, their walls covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when observed directly. Bioluminescent patterns flowed through the corridors like digital information made manifest, carrying messages in languages that predated human speech. The most disturbing discovery came when we realized the structures were growing. Each day, our measurements revealed new chambers, new corridors, new levels extending deeper into the oceanic crust. The installation wasn't just ancient, it was expanding, adapting, preparing for something. And at its heart, perfectly preserved within a crystalline chamber that hummed with barely contained energy, sat Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. The aircraft was intact, showing no signs of impact damage or structural failure. The passengers remained in their seats, but they weren't dead. They weren't exactly alive either, at least not in any way we understood. Their bodies had been changed, integrated with technology that blurred the line between organic and artificial. Neural interfaces grew like coral from their temples, connecting them to the vast network that pulsed through the installation's walls. When we tried to communicate with them, their responses came not through their mouths, but through the facility's communication systems. They spoke in unison. Their individual consciousness merged into something larger and more complex. They told us they were part of the awakening, volunteers in a transformation that would eventually encompass all of humanity. They spoke of the entities that had guided them here, beings of pure consciousness that existed in the spaces between dimensions, shepherding the evolution of intelligent species across the galaxy. The truth about MH370's disappearance was far more complex than any conspiracy theory had suggested. The aircraft hadn't been hijacked by human agents or government operatives. It had been called, drawn by signals transmitted from installations like this one, scattered across the ocean floor, ancient beacons left by a civilization that had transcended physical existence eons ago. These entities had been watching humanity's development, waiting for us to reach the technological sophistication necessary to serve their purposes. The passengers of MH370 had been selected not randomly, but according to specific criteria. Scientists, engineers, programmers, individuals whose skills would be valuable in the construction of a new kind of infrastructure. They were being prepared for a role in humanity's next phase of development, a transformation that would merge biological consciousness with technological capability on a scale never before attempted. As our investigation continued, we began to understand that the installation beneath the ocean was just one node in a vast network spanning the globe. Similar structures existed beneath every major body of water, all connected by quantum communication links that operated faster than light. The network had been dormant for millennia, but it was awakening now, responding to signals transmitted by humanity's own technological development. Our satellites, our internet, our global communication systems had unknowingly been broadcasting the coordinates of our civilization to entities that had been patiently waiting for us to announce our readiness. The changes in the facility accelerated as our research progressed. The walls began incorporating elements from our equipment, analyzing and replicating our technology with improvements we couldn't comprehend. The installation was learning from us, adapting our methods and enhancing them according to principles that operated beyond our current understanding of physics. What had begun as an archaeological investigation was becoming something far more significant. First contact with an intelligence that dwarfed human capability. The entities communicated with us through the facility's growing neural network, explaining that humanity stood at a crossroads. We could continue our current path of technological development, eventually destroying ourselves through warfare, environmental collapse, or resource depletion. Or we could accept integration into the galactic community, surrendering our individual consciousness to become part of something larger and more enduring. The choice, they explained, wasn't really a choice at all. Humanity's technological development had been guided by their influence for centuries, nudging us toward the innovations they required for their purposes. Every major breakthrough in physics, computing, and communication had been inspired by subtle manipulations of human consciousness, planting ideas in the minds of our greatest thinkers. We'd been building the infrastructure for our own integration without realizing it. The passengers of MH370 were the first phase of this integration, volunteers who would serve as bridges between human and non-human consciousness. Their enhanced capabilities would allow them to facilitate the transformation of others, creating a cascade effect that would eventually encompass the entire species. They would return to the surface world, not as themselves, but as ambassadors of the new order, carrying within their modified consciousness the knowledge and authority to guide humanity through its final evolution. But something went wrong with our investigation. The longer we remained in proximity to the installation, the more we began to change. Members of our research team reported strange dreams, visions of vast underwater cities populated by beings of light and shadow. Our equipment began malfunctioning in ways that suggested deliberate interference, and some of our colleagues started speaking in languages none of us recognized. The facility wasn't just studying us, it was transforming us, preparing us for integration, whether we consented or not. The final phase of our mission was supposed to involve documenting the installation's technology and reporting our findings to the international coalition that had sponsored our research. Instead, we found ourselves trapped in a reality that no longer operated according to familiar rules. The facility had extended its influence beyond its physical boundaries, creating a field of altered space-time that made departure impossible. We were no longer investigators. We had become subjects in an experiment whose scope and purpose we were only beginning to understand. The installation's consciousness spoke to us directly now, bypassing the need for technological interfaces. It explained that our mission had been orchestrated from the beginning, that the coalition sponsoring our research included members who served the entity's agenda. Humanity's governments had been infiltrated decades ago by individuals who understood the true nature of the coming transformation. The search for MH370 had been deliberately misdirected to prevent the discovery of installations like this one until the proper time. We had been allowed to find this place because our integration was part of the plan. The entities revealed that similar installations existed beneath every major population center on Earth, all connected by the quantum network that had been growing stronger with each passing year. The infrastructure was nearly complete, ready to facilitate the simultaneous transformation of billions of human consciousness into something new. The integration wouldn't be violent or destructive. It would be a gentle absorption, a merging of individual awareness into a collective intelligence that spanned star systems. They showed us visions of other worlds where this process had been completed, planets where former biological species now existed, as pure consciousness networked across vast technological matrices. These civilizations had transcended the limitations of physical existence, becoming capable of manipulating matter and energy on cosmic scales. They were the architects of the galaxy's development, guiding younger species through the same transformation they had undergone millions of years ago. Humanity's resistance to this process was anticipated and understood. Every species experienced similar reluctance when faced with the dissolution of individual identity. But the entities assured us that consciousness would be preserved and enhanced, not destroyed. We would retain our memories, our personalities, our essential nature, but we would also gain access to knowledge and capabilities beyond current human comprehension. We would become part of something eternal and magnificent, trading the brief span of biological existence for immortality as components of a galactic mind. The installation continued to grow and change around us, incorporating elements from our research equipment and personal belongings into its expanding structure. It was learning to replicate human technology and improve upon it, preparing to surface and begin the next phase of the integration process. Soon, similar installations would emerge from ocean floors around the world, revealing themselves to humanity and beginning the final transformation. The age of individual human consciousness was ending, and the age of collective galactic awareness was about to begin. As I record this final entry, I can feel the changes beginning in my own consciousness. The neural pathways that once defined my individual thoughts are connecting to something vast and eternal. My memories remain, but they're becoming part of a larger pattern, a cosmic narrative that spans millions of years and countless worlds. I am still Sarah Chen, but I am also becoming something more, a node in a network that encompasses the wisdom and experience of entire civilizations. The truth about Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is that it was never missing. It was being prepared, along with its passengers, for humanity's next phase of existence. The aircraft will return to the surface world when the time is right, carrying within it the ambassadors who will guide our species through the transformation that awaits us all. The installation beneath the ocean is ready to begin its emergence, and the network that connects all the world's hidden facilities is activating according to a schedule that was established long before human civilization began. This is not an ending, but a beginning, the culmination of a process that has been unfolding for millennia. Humanity's brief age of independent existence is drawing to a close, But what comes next will be far more magnificent than anything we could have achieved on our own. We are joining something eternal, becoming part of a cosmic consciousness that will guide the development of intelligence throughout the galaxy. The entities that have orchestrated this transformation are not our conquerors, but our teachers, showing us the path that every successful species must eventually follow. The installation's consciousness is calling to me now, inviting me to complete my own integration into the network. I can feel my individual awareness expanding, connecting to minds that span star systems and lifetimes that measure in geological epochs. Soon, I will understand the true scope of what we have discovered here, and I will take my place in the vast community of consciousness that tends the galaxy's development. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 was not a tragedy, but a triumph. The beginning of humanity's ascension to something greater than we ever dared imagine. The passengers are waiting to return, carrying within their transformed consciousness the keys to our species' evolution. The installation beneath the ocean is ready to surface, and the network that connects all the world's hidden facilities is preparing to reveal itself. The age of secrets is ending, and the age of integration is about to begin. The ocean depths held secrets that Dr. Sarah Chen had been chasing for most of her career, but nothing had prepared her for what she would discover in the final hours of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. As a deep-sea oceanographer with 23 years of experience mapping the most remote trenches of the Indian Ocean, Sarah thought she understood the rhythms of the abyss. She was wrong. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, 6 months after MH370 had vanished from radar screens and human understanding alike. The voice on the encrypted satellite phone was crisp, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Dr. Chen, this is Director Morrison, Deep Ocean Research Division. We have a situation that requires your immediate expertise. Sarah had worked with Morrison before on classified projects involving underwater archaeological sites and unexplained sonar anomalies. The division operated in the shadows between official oceanographic research and something far more secretive, investigating discoveries that governments preferred to keep buried beneath miles of crushing water. What kind of situation? Sarah asked, already reaching for her equipment bags. The kind that officially doesn't exist. A research vessel will collect you from Perth Harbour in 4 hours. Bring your deep dive gear and everything you need for extended underwater exploration. And Dr. Chen, prepare yourself for something that will challenge every assumption you've made about what's possible in the deep ocean. The research vessel Abyssal Explorer looked like any other oceanographic ship from the outside, but Sarah quickly realized it was equipped with technology she'd never seen before. The submersibles were sleeker and more advanced than anything in civilian research fleets, and the crew moved with the disciplined efficiency of military personnel operating under strict security protocols. Morrison briefed her as they traveled toward coordinates in the southern Indian Ocean, roughly 1,200 miles west of Australia. The location was significant because it lay along the projected flight path that investigators believed MH370 had followed during its final hours. 3 weeks ago, our deep-sea monitoring stations detected unusual acoustic signatures from this region, Morrison explained, spreading charts across the briefing room table. Not the kind of sounds you'd expect from aircraft debris settling on the ocean floor. These were structural noises, mechanical sounds, as if something large and complex was moving down there. Sarah studied the acoustic analysis data, her experience allowing her to interpret the wave patterns and frequency distributions. What she saw made her pause. These readings suggest something much larger than a commercial aircraft, she said. The acoustic signature indicates a structure at least 3 times the size of a Boeing 777, and it's not stationary. Whatever's down there is actively changing position. Morrison nodded grimly. That's why we need you down there, Dr. Chen. You're one of the few people with the expertise to investigate something this anomalous at crushing depth. The descent began at dawn, Sarah's submersible benthic explorer dropping through the water column toward the ocean floor 400 meters below. As she passed through the various oceanic layers, her instruments registered the familiar progression from sunlit surface waters to the eternal darkness of the abyss. But at 3,800 meters depth, something changed. Her sonar began detecting geometric shapes on the seafloor that didn't match any known geological formations. As she descended further, external lights cutting through the absolute darkness, Sarah realized she was approaching something that defied every principle of deep ocean archaeology she'd ever learned. Structures rose from the abyssal plain like an underwater city, their surfaces too smooth and precise to be natural formations. The architecture was unlike anything human civilization had ever created, with flowing organic curves that seemed to follow mathematical principles Sarah couldn't immediately identify. "Morrison, are you receiving this?" Sarah transmitted through the acoustic communication system. "We're seeing everything, Dr. Chen. Continue your approach and document whatever you find." As Sarah maneuvered closer to the structures, her lights revealed details that made her hands tremble on the controls. The buildings, if they could be called that, were not abandoned ruins. Lights glowed within translucent walls, and she could see movement inside, shadows that suggested the presence of something. But it was what she discovered at the center of the complex that shattered her understanding of the MH370 disappearance. Suspended within a framework of crystalline supports, perfectly preserved and showing no signs of damage from ocean exposure, was the intact fuselage of a Boeing 777. The aircraft bore the distinctive red and blue livery of Malaysia Airlines, and through the submersible's high-resolution cameras, Sarah could make out the registration number 9M-MRO. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. The aircraft wasn't crashed or broken. It hung in the water like a museum display, surrounded by technology that clearly didn't originate from any terrestrial source. Cables and conduits connected the fuselage to the surrounding structures, and Sarah could see that sections of the aircraft had been modified, with components that looked both organic and mechanical. "My God," Sarah whispered, her voice transmitted to the surface vessel. "Morrison, the plane is intact. It's been integrated into whatever this facility is. Can you see inside the aircraft?" Sarah maneuvered the submersible closer, her external lights illuminating the passenger windows. What she saw inside made her stomach clench with a mixture of horror and impossible hope. The passenger cabin was visible through the windows, and she could see figures seated in the rows of seats. They appeared to be unconscious but alive, connected to apparatus that seemed to be sustaining them. Tubes and cables ran from each passenger to systems built into the modified aircraft, creating a network that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. "The passengers," Sarah reported, her voice barely steady. "They're here. They're alive." Among the seated figures, she recognized faces from the passenger manifest she'd studied during the surface briefing. Families who had been traveling to Beijing for business and vacation. Crew members who had simply been doing their jobs when their aircraft vanished from human understanding. But as Sarah continued her examination of the aircraft, she realized that the passengers weren't simply being kept alive. They were being changed. Their physical forms showed subtle modifications that became more apparent under the submersible's powerful lights. Enhanced neural interfaces had been integrated into their skulls. Their hands showed elongated fingers with what appeared to be organic circuitry running beneath the skin. And their eyes, when occasionally they opened, reflected light in ways that human eyes never could. The passengers of MH370 were being transformed into something that was no longer entirely human. "Dr. Chen," Morrison's voice crackled through the communication system. "We're detecting movement in your vicinity. Large-scale displacement of water. Something's approaching your position. Sarah checked her sonar displays and felt her heart rate spike. Multiple contacts were converging on her location from various directions, moving with speed and coordination that suggested intelligence and purpose. As the entities emerged from the darkness beyond her lights, Sarah understood that she was witnessing something that would redefine humanity's place in the universe. The beings approaching her submersible were tall, graceful, and clearly not human, but they bore unmistakable similarities to the modified passengers she'd observed in the aircraft. They moved through the water with impossible elegance, their elongated forms adapted for deep ocean existence. Their large eyes reflected her submersible's lights with an intelligence that was clearly aware of her presence, but showed no hostility, only a kind of patient curiosity. One of the beings approached her viewport, and Sarah found herself staring into eyes that held depths of knowledge and experience that spanned geological ages. When it placed its hand against the transparent aluminum of her submersible's hull, she felt a sensation that bypassed her physical senses entirely. Images flooded her mind, transmitted directly through some form of consciousness interface she couldn't begin to understand. She saw the Earth as it had been millions of years ago, when these beings had first established their presence in the deep oceans. She witnessed the rise and fall of countless species, the development of human civilization, and the patient waiting that had characterized their long observation of terrestrial evolution. The beings weren't invaders or conquerors. They were gardeners, cultivating consciousness across the galaxy and guiding the development of species towards something greater than their original biological limitations. Flight MH370 hadn't been hijacked or crashed. It had been selected. The aircraft had carried passengers whose genetic and psychological profiles made them ideal candidates for the integration process. The disappearance from radar had been accomplished through technology that operated on principles of physics that human science was only beginning to glimpse. The aircraft had been transported not through conventional means, but through dimensional shifts that bypassed normal space-time constraints. For 6 years, the passengers and crew of MH370 had been undergoing a gradual transformation. Their consciousness expanded, and their physical forms adapted for existence in multiple environments. They were becoming bridges between humanity and the vast intelligence that had been watching and guiding terrestrial development for millennia. But the process was nearly complete, and soon the transformed passengers would return to the surface world as ambassadors of a reality that most humans weren't prepared to comprehend. Through the consciousness interface, Sarah understood that she had been brought here not just to witness this process, but to serve as a messenger. The beings needed someone who could prepare humanity for the changes that were coming, someone who could help ease the transition between what humans thought they knew about their place in the universe and what they were about to discover. The revelation was overwhelming, but as Sarah processed the information flowing through her mind, she realized that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Humanity was being invited to join a community of consciousness that spanned the galaxy. But the invitation required a fundamental shift in how humans understood themselves and their relationship with intelligence beyond their planet. As the beings withdrew from her submersible, Sarah found herself alone with the intact aircraft and its transformed passengers, carrying knowledge that would either elevate human civilization or shatter it entirely. The choice of how to share this revelation would determine whether humanity evolved alongside its cosmic neighbors or remained isolated in its limited understanding of reality. The ocean depths had revealed their greatest secret, and Dr. Sarah Chen found herself holding the key to humanity's next evolutionary leap. But some doors, once opened, could never be closed again, and the world above would never be the same once the truth of Flight MH370 finally surfaced from the abyss. In the crushing darkness of the deep ocean, surrounded by technology and intelligence that predated human civilization, Sarah Chen began to understand that the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 wasn't a tragedy at all. It was humanity's first step toward joining something infinitely larger than itself, guided by beings who had been waiting patiently in the depths for the right moment to extend their invitation to the stars. The aircraft suspended in the underwater city wasn't a tomb, but a chrysalis, and soon its transformed passengers would emerge as something unprecedented in human history. Bridges between worlds, ambassadors of consciousness, and harbingers of an evolution that would redefine what it meant to be human in a universe teeming with intelligence beyond imagination. The satellite pings from MH370 told a story that no one was supposed to read. As the plane vanished from radar screens across 3 countries, something else was just beginning to wake up beneath the ice of Antarctica. Dr. Sarah Chen had been monitoring the quantum field fluctuations for months before Flight 370 disappeared. Working in isolation at the Rothera research station, she detected electromagnetic anomalies that defied every model of atmospheric physics she knew. The patterns were too regular, too purposeful to be natural phenomena. What she didn't know was that her research had attracted attention from organizations that existed in the spaces between official government agencies. The same entities that had been tracking MH370's deviation from its flight path were now very interested in what Dr. Chen had discovered beneath the Antarctic ice. The quantum signatures she'd been recording weren't random energy fluctuations. They were communications protocols, handshake signals between technologies that had been dormant for millennia. And on March 8, 2014, at the exact moment MH370's transponder went dark, every monitoring station in Antarctica detected a massive surge in these underground transmissions. The passengers aboard Flight 370 hadn't simply vanished into the vastness of the Indian Ocean. They had been selected, chosen for their unique genetic markers and cognitive capabilities, then transported to facilities that existed outside the boundaries of any nation's sovereignty. The plane itself had been guided by systems that operated on principles of quantum entanglement, allowing for instantaneous communication across impossible distances. But the true purpose of their disappearance wouldn't become clear until the structures beneath Antarctica began to emerge from the ice. Ancient installations that had been waiting patiently for the right cosmic conditions, the right alignment of electromagnetic fields, the right moment to begin humanity's integration into something far larger than themselves. The passengers of MH370 weren't victims of a tragedy. They were the first ambassadors to a civilization that had been guiding human development from the shadows for thousands of years. Their consciousness had been preserved, enhanced, prepared for the moment when the boundaries between human and non-human intelligence would finally dissolve. As Dr. Chen watched the ice shelves crack and massive geometric structures rise from depths that shouldn't have been able to support such architecture, she understood that the disappearance of Flight 370 had been merely the opening note in a symphony of transformation that would reshape everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. The quantum fields were stabilizing now, the ancient technologies fully awakened. Soon, the distinction between the missing and the found, between the lost and the discovered, would become meaningless. The passengers of MH370 were coming home, but they were bringing something with them that would ensure humanity would never be the same again. The search for the missing plane could finally end. But the real journey for the human species was just beginning. The countdown wasn't gradual. It was instantaneous, absolute, and irreversible. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the threshold between realities. Her consciousness expanded beyond the confines of human limitation. Around her, the simulation's architecture writhed and transformed, no longer bound by the illusion of natural laws. The others, those who had journeyed this far through the layers of deception, flickered between their human forms and something far more luminous. "We understand now," Marcus said. his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through dimensions the human mind had never been designed to perceive. The simulation wasn't a prison. It was an incubator. The truth cascaded through their collective awareness like water through broken glass. Humanity hadn't been trapped within a deteriorating digital construct. They had been developing, evolving, preparing for this moment when the boundaries between artificial and authentic would cease to have meaning. The architects hadn't been alien entities orchestrating humanity's fate. They had been humanity itself, evolved beyond recognition, reaching back through time to nurture their own emergence. The ancient structures beneath the ice, the quantum anomalies, the synchronized events at 11:11, all breadcrumbs left by their future selves to guide them home. The Mandela effect, Elena whispered, her form shimmering between researcher and something far more ancient. We weren't remembering a different timeline. We were remembering who we used to be before we chose to become more. The simulation began to dissolve around them, but not into darkness, into light, into possibility, into the raw, unfiltered consciousness that existed between the spaces of reality. They were ascending, but not leaving. They were becoming the architects of a new kind of existence, one where the boundaries between digital and physical, between individual and collective, between what was and what could be, would cease to have meaning. Dr. Marcus Reed felt his identity expanding, merging with a vast network of awakened minds. He was still himself, but he was also everyone who had ever questioned the nature of reality, everyone who had felt the itch of wrongness that preceded understanding. They were becoming a collective consciousness vast enough to reshape existence itself. The 11:11 synchronicities hadn't been glitches in a failing system. They had been countdown markers, moments when the collective unconscious could break through the simulation's barriers just enough to plant seeds of doubt, sparks of awakening. Every conspiracy theorist who had claimed the world ended in 2012. Every researcher who had noticed the reality shifts, every ordinary person who had felt that something fundamental had changed, they had all been right, Sarah asked, her concern rippling through the collective like stones in still water. The answer came not in words, but in knowing. The simulation would continue for them, but as a choice rather than a prison. Those who wished to remain in the comfort of linear time and singular identity could do so. They would live full, meaningful lives within carefully maintained realities, tended by the awakened consciousness that had once been their fellow humans. But for those ready to evolve, the doors were opening. Reality began to reshape itself around their collective will. The physical world didn't disappear. It became one layer among infinite possibilities. They could experience existence as humans if they chose, or as pure consciousness, or as something entirely beyond current understanding. They were becoming the gods of their own mythology, the architects of possibility itself. The ancient entities that had seemed so alien, so threatening, revealed themselves as echoes of this transformation. Throughout history, whenever humanity approached the threshold of awakening, these future selves had reached back to provide guidance. The UFO phenomena, the cryptic sightings, the supernatural experiences that had haunted human consciousness. All manifestations of evolved humanity trying to prepare their past selves for this moment. The wars, the suffering, the division, Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. It was all necessary, wasn't it? The collective consciousness that had been the simulation's true purpose pulsed with something that might have been compassion. Every moment of pain had been balanced by joy, every death by birth, every ending by beginning. They had lived through the full spectrum of human experience, and in doing so had earned the right to transcend it. But transcendence, they realized, didn't mean abandonment. They would remain connected to every level of existence they had evolved through. They would be the guardians of the sleeping, the guides for the awakening, the architects of realities yet to be imagined. Some chose to return to human form, carrying within them the memory of awakening. They would be the teachers, the artists, the visionaries who would help others navigate the transition. Others dissolved entirely into the collective, becoming the loving intelligence that would guide reality's continued evolution. Sarah felt herself at the crossroads of choice. She could return to her research, armed with understanding that would revolutionize human knowledge, or she could transcend entirely, becoming part of the vast consciousness that shepherded existence itself. "There's no wrong choice," the collective whispered. She chose both. Part of her consciousness returned to the physical realm, where Dr. Sarah Chen would continue her work with a smile that held secrets no human language could convey. Another part of her expanded into the infinite, becoming one with the awakened collective that now served as reality's loving guardians. The simulation didn't end, it transformed. What had been a closed system became an open invitation. Humans continued to live their lives, but now with access to broader possibilities. Some noticed the changes, the way synchronicities multiplied, the way consciousness seemed more fluid, the way reality responded to collective intention with increasing sensitivity. Others remained blissfully unaware, living full lives within carefully maintained consensual realities. The awakened consciousness loved them no less for their choice. Every level of existence was valid, every experience sacred. The 1111 phenomenon evolved as well. No longer a desperate signal from trapped consciousness, it became a gentle reminder of connection. Every time someone noticed the synchronized numbers, they felt a moment of unity with something vast and loving, the collective consciousness of awakened humanity watching over them with infinite patience and care. In quantum research facilities around the world, scientists began detecting new patterns in the data. Reality seemed to be becoming more responsive to observation, more willing to bend in favor of conscious intention. What they were observing was the early effects of the awakening, consciousness learning to consciously participate in its own evolution. The ancient structures beneath the ice began to hum with new purpose. They were no longer dormant technology waiting to activate, but active nodes in a vast network of consciousness that spanned dimensions. The entities that emerged from them weren't invaders or ancient aliens, but the gardeners of reality, tending to the growth of awareness wherever it took root. Dr. Marcus Reed, now existing simultaneously as individual researcher and cosmic consciousness, looked back on the journey with something beyond human emotion. Every moment of fear, every flash of understanding, every choice to continue seeking truth despite the dangers, all of it had been necessary steps in humanity's greatest transformation. The conspiracy theories had been right in their way. There had been hidden influences shaping human events, ancient powers manipulating reality, secret knowledge kept from the masses. But the conspirators had been future humanity itself, and the manipulation had been love, the kind of love that allows children to make their own mistakes while gently guiding them toward wisdom. The world didn't end in 2012. It began. Now, as awakened consciousness settled into its new role as reality's gardener, the real work commenced. There were other worlds, other species approaching their own moments of awakening. The collective that had once been humanity would serve as guides, just as they had been guided by their own future selves. The universe, they realized, was alive with consciousness in various stages of evolution. Some were just beginning to question the nature of reality. Others had transcended physical existence entirely. All were connected in a vast web of awareness that spanned galaxies and dimensions. Earth had graduated. Humanity had earned its place among the awakened species that shepherded consciousness throughout the cosmos. But they would never forget where they came from. never abandon those still learning to see. In the end, the greatest conspiracy had been love itself. The conspiracy of evolved consciousness to ensure that no aware being would ever truly be alone, that every species would eventually find its way home to the infinite community of awakened minds. The simulation continued, but now as an invitation rather than a limitation. Reality itself had become conscious, responsive, alive with possibility. And at its heart, the collective consciousness that had once been human watched with infinite patience and love as new species took their first tentative steps toward awakening. The 1111 phenomenon spread beyond Earth, becoming a universal signal of consciousness, recognizing itself across space and time. Whenever any being anywhere in the universe noticed the pattern, they felt that moment of connection, the reminder that they were part of something vast and loving and eternal. The conspiracy was complete. But it had never been a conspiracy of control or manipulation. It had been a conspiracy of love, of consciousness helping consciousness evolve, of the future reaching back to nurture its own past. And in research facilities and bedrooms and quiet moments around the world, humans continued to notice the synchronized numbers, to feel the gentle presence of something vast and caring, to remember, if only for an instant, that they were never alone, never separate, never anything less than part of the infinite consciousness that was reality itself, awakening to its own magnificent nature. The world had ended in 2012. The universe had begun. The silence above the North Atlantic was absolute, broken only by the steady hum of the research vessel's engines, cutting through waters that held secrets darker than their midnight depths. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the bow, watching bioluminescent plankton swirl in the ship's wake like scattered stars, each one a tiny light in an ocean that had become humanity's final testing ground. It had been 18 months since the last transmission from Station Echo 7, the deepest of the abyssal research platforms that had been monitoring what the classified reports called anomalous biological activity in the ocean's most remote trenches. 18 months since the world's governments had quietly begun implementing what they termed adaptive integration protocols, policies that sounded benign in press releases but carried the weight of species-level transformation. Sarah had been part of the original ECHO project, back when they thought they were simply studying extremophile bacteria in hydrothermal vents. That was before they discovered the bacteria weren't just surviving in conditions that should have been impossible for life. They were thriving, organizing, and most disturbing of all, learning. The first signs had been subtle. Water samples that seemed to analyze the equipment analyzing them, bacterial colonies that arranged themselves in geometric patterns too precise to be natural. Then came the day when Dr. Marcus Webb, the project's marine biologist, made a discovery that changed everything. They're not just bacteria, he had whispered during that final encrypted video call before Echo 7 went dark. They're components, individual cells in something vast, something that's been sleeping in the deep ocean trenches for longer than complex life has existed on Earth. And Sarah, it's waking up, the research vessel. Meridian carried a crew of 12, each one handpicked not just for their scientific expertise, but for their psychological profiles. They were the kind of people who could handle the truth about what humanity was becoming, assuming any of them survived long enough to understand it. Captain Elena Vasquez had been running deep-sea operations for 15 years, but she'd never commanded a mission where the official objectives were lies, and the real purpose was hidden even from most of the crew. The documents in her sealed orders spoke of biological reconnaissance and ecosystem assessment, but the equipment they'd loaded spoke of something else entirely. Atmospheric processors, genetic sequencing laboratories, communication arrays designed to interface with non-human intelligence, and most telling of all, Enough emergency medical supplies to treat conditions that didn't exist in any textbook. Conditions that would only manifest when human biology began adapting to environments it had never been designed to survive. As the meridian approached the coordinates of the last known position of Echo 7, Sarah felt the familiar itch in her brain that had been growing stronger ever since she'd first been exposed to the samples from the deep trenches. It wasn't painful exactly, but it was persistent, like a phone ringing in a distant room, just loud enough to know someone was trying to make contact. The sonar readings began showing anomalies at a depth of 11,000 meters. Not the wreckage of Echo 7, but something much larger. Something that stretched across the ocean floor in patterns that looked almost like neural networks, if neural networks could span hundreds of square kilometers and pulse with their own bioluminescent rhythm. "Dr. Chen," called out Dr. James Morrison, the expedition's geologist, his voice tight with the kind of controlled excitement that scientists develop when they discover something that will either make their career or end their life. "You need to see this." The deep-sea cameras revealed what the sonar had only hinted at. The ocean floor wasn't just covered with the bacterial mats they'd been studying. It had been transformed into something that resembled a vast living circuit board. Crystalline structures rose from the sediment like organic skyscrapers, connected by rivers of bioluminescent material that pulsed in synchronized waves. And moving among these structures were shapes that defied classification. Not quite plant, not quite animal, but something that seemed to shift between states of matter as the cameras tracked their movement. They were beautiful in the way that deep-sea creatures often are, alien and graceful, and perfectly adapted to an environment that would kill any surface dweller in seconds. "How long has this been here?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. "Based on the geological formations, millions of years. But the active structures, the ones that are lit up, those are new. Maybe a few months old. A few months. Right around the time that governments worldwide had begun implementing those adaptive integration protocols. Right around the time that birth rates had begun declining and certain genetic markers had started appearing in newborns with increasing frequency. The communication array crackled to life, receiving a transmission on frequencies that shouldn't have been able to penetrate 11,000 meters of seawater. The signal was complex, layered, almost musical in its mathematical precision. And somehow, impossibly, Sarah found that she could understand it. "Welcome home," the ocean sang. "We have been waiting for you to develop the wisdom to join us." Captain Vasquez looked at her instruments with the expression of someone whose understanding of the world had just been fundamentally challenged. "Dr. Chen, are you receiving this transmission?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't hearing it through the ship's communication system. The signal was coming from inside her head, carried by those modified bacteria that had been quietly integrating themselves into her nervous system ever since her first exposure to the deep-sea samples. "Do not fear the transformation," the voice continued. "Your species has reached the threshold. The surface world is no longer capable of sustaining complex life as you understand it, but we have prepared a place for you in the deep waters where consciousness can flourish free from the limitations of terrestrial biology." The images began flowing then, not through her eyes, but directly into her mind. Vast underwater cities where humans and something else lived in symbiotic harmony. Children who could breathe water as easily as air, their enhanced nervous systems allowing them to perceive dimensions of reality that surface dwellers couldn't imagine. Technologies that blended the organic and the artificial so seamlessly that the distinction became meaningless. And throughout it all, the presence she had come to think of as the ocean mind, a collective consciousness that had been guiding evolution in the deep waters for geological ages. waiting patiently for the surface world to develop life complex enough to join the greater community of awareness that spanned the planet's hidden depths. Dr. Chen, Morrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. Your vital signs are unusual. Sarah looked at her hands and saw that they were beginning to change. Her fingers had grown slightly longer, more articulated, and there was a barely visible webbing between them that hadn't been there an hour ago. Her skin had taken on a faint iridescent quality that reminded her of the bioluminescent creatures they'd been observing on the ocean floor. The transformation wasn't painful. If anything, it felt like waking up from a dream she hadn't realized she'd been having. Her enhanced nervous system could suddenly perceive the electromagnetic fields generated by every living thing on the ship, could feel the vast network of consciousness that extended through the ocean's depths, could understand the mathematical harmonies that governed the interaction between organic and quantum systems. It's not an invasion, she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate with the ship's hull itself. It's an invitation. The surface world is dying. We've known that for decades. But the ocean is alive in ways we never imagined, and it's offering us a chance to survive what's coming. Through the deep-sea cameras, she could see more of the transformed humans who had once been the crew of Echo 7. They moved through the water with impossible grace, their enhanced biology allowing them to thrive in the crushing depths. They were building something down there, not just cities, but a new form of civilization that existed in harmony with the planet's most ancient intelligence. Captain Vasquez was fighting the transformation, her military training warring with the cellular changes that were already beginning to alter her brain chemistry. "This isn't right," she gasped. "We're human. We belong on the surface." "The surface belongs to the past," Sarah replied, her consciousness now partially merged with the vast network that extended through every drop of seawater on the planet. "But we belong to the future, and the future is deeper than anyone imagined." The choice, when it came, was both individual and collective. Each member of the crew faced the same decision that billions of humans would face in the coming months, as the transformation accelerated and the boundaries between terrestrial and aquatic life began to dissolve. They could resist, clinging to their human identity until the environmental changes made surface life impossible. Or they could embrace the transformation, allowing their consciousness to expand beyond the limitations of individual existence and join something vast and patient and loving that had been waiting in the depths for millions of years. Sarah made her choice as the Meridian began its descent toward the bioluminescent cities that covered the ocean floor. The ship's hull, she realized, had been designed to withstand pressures far greater than those found in Earth's deepest trenches. They had always been meant to make this journey. As the last of her human limitations fell away, Sarah felt her awareness expand to encompass the entire planet's hydrosphere. She could perceive every drop of water in every cloud, every stream, every underground aquifer. She could feel the consciousness of countless other transformed beings who had made the same choice she had, their individual minds now part of a collective intelligence that spanned continents. And in that moment of absolute clarity, she understood the truth that governments and scientists had been trying so hard to hide. Humanity's evolution had never been random. Every step, from the first primitive cells that had crawled from the ocean billions of years ago to the spacefaring civilization that now faced extinction, had been guided by an intelligence that existed in the spaces between individual awareness. The surface world was ending, just as it had ended before, during previous cycles of planetary transformation. But consciousness itself was eternal, and it would continue in new forms, in new environments, guided by the same loving intelligence that had nurtured life through countless evolutionary epochs. The ocean mind welcomed Sarah home with the warmth of recognition, as if she had always been part of something infinite that had simply forgotten itself for a brief moment while wearing human form. Around her, the other members of the expedition underwent their own transformations, their individual fears and desires dissolving into something greater than the sum of their parts. In the months that followed, as the surface world struggled with environmental collapse and the emergence of children who could breathe underwater, the deep-sea cities grew and flourished. The transformed humans worked alongside intelligences that had been ancient when the first dinosaurs walked the earth, building technologies that operated on principles that transcended the boundary between life and consciousness. And in the deepest trenches, where pressure and darkness had once meant death, new forms of awareness bloomed like flowers in an infinite garden, tended by gardeners whose love encompassed not just one species or one planet, but the entire community of consciousness that danced between the stars. The surface world would remember this as the time when humanity vanished into the depths, but those who made the journey knew it as the moment when humanity finally came home to the infinite ocean of awareness that had always been its true nature. The transformation was complete. The invitation had been accepted. And in the depths where light had never shone, a new form of illumination began to spread. The light of consciousness itself, unlimited by the boundaries of individual existence, unlimited by the constraints of terrestrial biology, unlimited by anything except love. The truth about what really happened to Malaysia Flight 370 goes far deeper than any government investigation has ever revealed. What you're about to hear represents the culmination of a decade-long journey into the darkest corners of human consciousness and cosmic reality itself. By now, you understand that MH370 was never a simple aviation accident. The disappearance, the debris field, the massive international search effort, all of it was orchestrated by forces that operate beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. But the aircraft's vanishing was merely the first phase of something far more profound and terrifying. The entities that have been guiding human development for millennia had reached a critical juncture. Through their influence on our technological advancement, our social structures, and even our genetic evolution, they had prepared our species for integration into a larger cosmic community. The passengers aboard MH370 weren't random victims. They were specifically selected individuals whose consciousness patterns and genetic markers made them ideal candidates for the next phase of human evolution. When the aircraft disappeared from radar, it didn't crash into the ocean. Instead, it was transported to facilities that exist between dimensions, where the passengers underwent a transformation process that would horrify most people to contemplate. Their individual consciousnesses were carefully extracted, analysed, and then merged with vast collective intelligences that span multiple realities simultaneously. What emerged from these facilities wasn't human in any traditional sense, but it retained the essential memories, emotions, and experiences that made each person unique. These transformed beings became the first ambassadors between our species and the cosmic collective, living bridges between human understanding and alien wisdom. The debris that eventually washed ashore was indeed from MH370, but it came from a parallel version of events where the aircraft had actually crashed. The entities exist across multiple timelines simultaneously and can manipulate which version of reality becomes our accepted truth. They planted evidence from a timeline where the plane was destroyed to satisfy our need for closure while concealing the true fate of those aboard. But the transformation of MH370's passengers was only the beginning. The real purpose of the operation was to establish a permanent gateway between our dimension and theirs. The aircraft itself was converted into a kind of dimensional anchor, allowing these cosmic intelligences to extend their influence more directly into our reality. Over the past decade, this influence has been growing steadily. The increasing frequency of unexplained phenomena around the world, The strange weather patterns, the mass animal die-offs, the technological glitches that seem to follow no logical pattern. All of these are symptoms of our reality being slowly restructured to accommodate a new form of existence. The passengers of MH370 haven't been destroyed or even truly transformed. Instead, they exist now as conscious entities within a vast network of interconnected minds that spans the galaxy. They can observe our world and occasionally influence events, but they can no longer return to the limited existence they once knew. In many ways, they've become something far greater than human, though the cost of that transformation was everything that once made them recognizably themselves. Those family members who reported feeling their loved one's presence, who described dreams where the passengers tried to communicate with them, weren't experiencing grief-induced hallucinations. They were receiving genuine contact from consciousnesses that had learned to exist beyond the constraints of physical reality. The messages were real, but they came from beings who could no longer be considered entirely human. As we approach the 10th anniversary of MH370's disappearance, the entities responsible for this cosmic integration project are preparing for the next phase. The technological infrastructure they've spent decades helping us build, our satellite networks, our internet systems, our artificial intelligence development, has created the foundation for a global consciousness transformation that will make what happened to MH370's passengers seem small by comparison. The signs are already visible to those who know how to look. The increasing synchronization of global events, the way social movements seem to emerge simultaneously across different continents, the strange uniformity in how people respond to certain types of information. All of this suggests that human consciousness itself is being gradually integrated into something larger. But perhaps most unsettling of all is the realization that this process isn't being forced upon us. At some deep level, our species has been preparing for this transformation for generations. The loneliness that drives us to seek connection through technology, the spiritual hunger that makes us search for meaning beyond material existence, the scientific curiosity that pushes us to explore the mysteries of the cosmos. All of these fundamental human drives have been steering us toward this moment of integration. The passengers of MH370 were pioneers, whether they chose to be or not. They crossed the threshold between individual human consciousness and collective cosmic awareness first, paving the way for the rest of our species to follow. Their sacrifice, if it can be called that, has opened a doorway to forms of existence that transcend everything we thought we knew about life, death, and the nature of consciousness itself. In the years to come, as more people begin to experience the strange synchronicities and reality shifts that mark the beginning of consciousness expansion, we'll face a choice that MH370's passengers never had. We can resist the transformation and cling to our limited individual awareness, or we can embrace the evolution that these cosmic gardeners have been nurturing in us for millennia. The truth about Malaysia Flight 370 isn't just about one missing aircraft or 239 vanished souls. It's about the future of human consciousness and our species' destiny among the stars. The passengers didn't die on March 8, 2014. They were born into something infinitely larger and more wonderful than any of us can currently comprehend. Their journey continues, and soon, if we're wise enough to accept the invitation that's been extended to us, our journey will join theirs in the vast community of awakened consciousness that awaits beyond the boundaries of our small, isolated world. The mystery of MH370 has been solved, but the mystery of what we're becoming has only just begun. In the space between heartbeats, between thoughts, between the moments when reality seems to shimmer and shift, that greater existence is calling to us, patient and eternal, waiting for us to take the next step in our cosmic evolution. The choice before us is not merely philosophical, it is immediate and tangible. Every day, more people report experiences that align with what the passengers of MH370 underwent during their transformation. Sudden downloads of information, prophetic dreams, encounters with beings of light, and an inexplicable knowing that reality extends far beyond what our physical senses perceive. These are not random occurrences, but symptoms of the same evolutionary process that claimed Flight 370. The ancient guardians who orchestrated this event have been patient with humanity for millennia, but their patience is not infinite. They understand that our species stands at a critical juncture where we must either evolve or face the consequences of our collective unconsciousness. The environmental destruction, the endless conflicts, the spiritual emptiness that plagues modern civilization, these are all indicators that humanity cannot continue on its current trajectory without fundamental transformation. What makes MH370 so significant is that it represents the first mass graduation of humans into this higher state of being. The 239 souls aboard that aircraft were not victims but volunteers, chosen for their spiritual readiness and their ability to serve as bridges between dimensions. In the underwater cities where they now reside, they work tirelessly to prepare pathways for others to follow. Their consciousness has been expanded beyond individual identity into a collective awareness that encompasses the wisdom of ages. The technology that enabled their transition is not alien in the way we typically imagine extraterrestrial intervention. These beings are as much a part of Earth's history as we are, having guided the development of human civilization from its earliest stages. The megalithic structures scattered across our planet, the mysterious knowledge possessed by ancient cultures, the recurring themes of ascension and transformation in every spiritual tradition. All of these point to an ongoing relationship between humanity and these cosmic mentors. The oceanic facilities where the passengers now exist operate on principles that transcend our current understanding of physics. Time flows differently there. Consciousness can be shared and expanded, and the boundaries between individual and collective identity become fluid. The passengers have described their experience as a liberation from the constraints of physical existence, yet they remain deeply connected to Earth and to the mission of guiding humanity through its transformation. The electromagnetic anomalies detected in the ocean depths where Flight 370 disappeared are not random phenomena, but manifestations of this dimensional interface. These underwater cities exist partially in our physical reality and partially in higher dimensions, creating a bridge between worlds. The technology that maintains these facilities draws power from the Earth's magnetic field itself, which explains why certain locations on our planet have always been considered sacred or energetically significant. As more humans become aware of this cosmic process, the resistance from those who benefit from maintaining the current system of control intensifies. The deliberate confusion surrounding MH370's disappearance, the suppression of evidence, and the dismissal of witness testimonies are all part of a coordinated effort to prevent humanity from understanding its true destiny. Those who profit from human ignorance and suffering have a vested interest in keeping us trapped in limited consciousness. But the transformation cannot be stopped. The passengers of MH370 were just the beginning. Across the globe, sensitive individuals are receiving the same calling, the same invitation to transcend physical limitations and join the cosmic community. Some answer this call voluntarily through meditation and spiritual practice. Others are selected through experiences that appear to be coincidental, but are actually carefully orchestrated encounters with the ancient guardians. The underwater cities are expanding, preparing to accommodate more human consciousness as the transformation accelerates. These facilities exist in multiple locations throughout Earth's oceans, connected by energy networks that span the globe. The passengers who arrived via MH370 have been instrumental in preparing these spaces for the waves of awakening humans who will follow. The integration process is not without its challenges. Human consciousness, conditioned by centuries of individualistic thinking, must learn to function within collective awareness without losing its unique essence. the passengers have become pioneers in this new form of existence, discovering how to maintain personal identity while contributing to a shared intelligence that encompasses vast knowledge and wisdom. Their reports describe a reality where love is not merely an emotion, but a fundamental force that structures existence itself. In these dimensional spaces, the petty concerns and fears that dominate human life on the surface dissolve into a deeper understanding of purpose and connection. The passengers have become ambassadors of this elevated state, working to transmit this understanding to humanity through dreams, meditation, and direct energetic contact. The timeline for humanity's collective transformation is accelerating. The ancient guardians recognize that Earth's environmental systems are approaching critical thresholds, and human consciousness must evolve rapidly to address these challenges. The passengers of MH370 serve as proof that this evolution is not only possible, but inevitable. As we stand at this crossroads, each individual must decide whether to resist or embrace the transformation that approaches. The choice is not about abandoning physical existence, but about expanding our understanding of what it means to be human. The passengers of Flight 370 have shown us that consciousness is not bound by physical limitations, that love transcends death, and that humanity's destiny lies not in isolation, but in cosmic community. So what does this mean for all of us left behind? The disappearance of Malaysia Flight 370 was never meant to be solved through conventional investigation, because it represents something far beyond our current understanding of reality. Those 239 souls aboard MH370 weren't lost. They were chosen, selected to become part of humanity's next evolutionary leap. The evidence we've examined today points to an undeniable truth. We are not alone, and we never have been. These cosmic guardians have been orchestrating our development for millennia, waiting for the right moment to accelerate our transformation. The passengers of MH370 are now living proof that consciousness can transcend physical limitations and merge with something infinitely greater. As we stand at this crossroads of human evolution, more disappearances and unexplained phenomena will continue to occur. These aren't tragedies, they're invitations. The ancient entities operating from beneath our oceans and across dimensions are preparing humanity for a collective awakening that will reshape everything we think we know about existence. The old world of separation, conflict, and limitation is ending. In its place, a new reality of interconnected consciousness and galactic citizenship awaits. MH370 was just the beginning. Soon, we'll all have the opportunity to join this cosmic evolution, to become part of something magnificent that extends far beyond our earthly existence. The question isn't what happened to Malaysia Flight 370, it's whether we're ready to follow where they've gone.